Picture this. You're in an airplane seat. The speed is building, pressing you back into your chair. You trust that the runway is clear. After all, air traffic controllers are watching out for you. And more importantly, so are the unbiased computers that see everything. But what if I told you that sometimes, a safety system doesn't need a hurricane or some malicious act to fail? All it takes is a single bird, 2 clicks of a radio button, and one tiny line of code that makes a computer lie to the controller. On March 7, 2020, in Toronto, 2 massive machines with hundreds of people on board found themselves on the same runway, heading straight for disaster. One was braking, the other was accelerating right into its tail. And the most terrifying part? For the safety system, both planes were already in the air, even though their wheels were still touching the concrete. How is that possible? Welcome to a story where technology went blind, and the lives of hundreds of people hung on a split second. Perfect visibility, the most dangerous trap for anyone who lets their guard down. We're at Toronto Pearson International Airport. It's the morning of March 7th. The air is frosty, dense, and piercingly clear. For aviation, this is a gift. Visibility is virtually unlimited. No fog, not a hint of snow. It seems like in these conditions, nothing could possibly go wrong. The airport is alive with its usual frantic rhythm. Look at this field from above. This isn't just asphalt. It's a giant, pulsating organism. 5 runways cut through the space, and between them weaves a complex web of taxiways. It's a true labyrinth for airliners. The traffic here never stops for a second. Giant machines weighing hundreds of tons maneuver, take off, and touch down in a continuous flow. But it's this very scale that plays a cruel trick. The control tower rises in the center like a command post, but the airport has grown so large that control itself has become a challenge. Some runway ends are so far from the tower that controllers can't physically make out details with the naked eye. They have to grab binoculars just to see if the path is clear. This creates zones where both technology and people become vulnerable. However, the critical error this morning isn't hiding in the miles of asphalt. The problem isn't that the controller can't reach his binoculars. The problem is where the attention of the person managing this chaos is directed. At this very moment, he's looking anywhere but where the irreversible is already beginning to unfold. The silence inside the glass dome of the tower sometimes holds more threat than the most intense radio exchange. There are 9 equipped workstations here, but right now, most of the chairs are empty. Only 4 positions are staffed. Management considers the current traffic moderate, so there's no need to bring in a full shift. This decision sets off a chain reaction. One controller is forced to do the work of 2, taking on a double workload. This is called a combined position. The person in the headset is simultaneously controlling both the north and south sectors of the airfield. Imagine you're playing 2 different chess games on 2 different boards, but one of them is behind your back. The controller is in a constant mental split. But the most terrifying part lies in the geometry of the room itself. To see runway 06 left, the very point on the map where fates are about to collide, it's not enough for him to just glance over or turn his head. He has to physically leave his chair, stand, turn his body a full 180 degrees, and peer over the heads of his colleagues sitting behind him. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a real physical barrier. Every such movement requires effort, and the brain, hardwired to conserve energy, subconsciously tries to avoid extra actions if a situation seems routine. This setup is considered standard practice, a routine written into the manuals. The controller feels no danger because he has an invisible assistant. He relies not only on his own vision, which is blocked by the backs of his colleagues, but also on technology. His greatest hope is the RIMCAS system. It's an electronic guardian, a complex algorithm designed to warn of any conflicts on the runway. The controller is convinced, if he misses something, the smart machine will immediately sound the alarm and have his back. A red square on the monitor can scream louder than any human voice. The controllers sitting in the tower aren't just guessing. Their safety net is RIMCAS, the Runway Incursion Monitoring and Conflict Alert System. It sounds complicated, but essentially, it's the airport's digital guardian angel. Think of it like the world's most powerful parking sensor, But instead of a car's bumper, it's monitoring multi-ton airliners. This smart algorithm works non-stop. It greedily consumes data from ground radars that scan every foot of concrete and combines it with signals from the aircraft's own transponders. The system doesn't just see dots, it calculates vectors. It knows the speed, the heading, and most importantly, where these machines will be in 10 seconds. If the math predicts that their paths will cross, RIMCAS is programmed to intervene. The system doesn't panic right away. It acts in stages. First, it triggers a Level 1 alert. This is a visual warning. On the controller's display, right in the middle of all the green markers, a warning symbol starts to flash. It's like a polite but firm tap on the shoulder. Hey, pay attention to this. The controller is supposed to see this in their peripheral vision and assess the situation. But if the distance keeps shrinking and the headings don't change, it triggers a Level 2 alert. This is no longer a hint, it's a direct threat. A sharp, piercing alarm sounds through the quiet tower. A siren. It's designed to cut through any conversation and instantly trigger an adrenaline rush. That sound means there's no more time to think. A collision is imminent unless someone acts right now. It seems like a foolproof defense. However, this digital guardian has a peculiar feature, one dictated by logic, not the instinct for self-preservation. To avoid driving people crazy with false alarms every time planes are close but safe, the system has a built-in delay mechanism. The algorithm gives pilots and controllers a few precious seconds to correct the mistake before raising the alarm. It assumes the situation is under control. And it's this short, programmed silence that becomes the critical factor today. False alarms are the sworn enemy of any safety system, and engineers know this better than anyone. If the computer beeped every time a bird flew over the runway, controllers would simply start ignoring the signal. To avoid chaos and prevent people from being driven mad by constant alerts, RIMCAS has a strict deactivation protocol. The logic is ironclad. If the system thinks an aircraft is already in the air, it stops tracking it as an obstacle on the ground. After all, in theory, an object that is flying cannot collide with one that is driving on the asphalt. But this raises the main question. How does a blind box of microchips know what's happening in reality? It has no eyes. It doesn't look out the window. It relies entirely on what the aircraft itself tells it through its ADS-B data transmission system. This is a digital dialogue between machines, hidden from the human ear. Normally, the criteria for takeoff are sensors on the landing gear. As soon as the struts extend and the weight is off the wheels, the plane sends a signal. I'm airborne. But the programmers, in their quest for perfection, added a redundant condition that would prove to be fatal. They wrote a rule into the code based on speed. The computer reasons like this. If an object is moving faster than 100 knots, that's about 185 kilometers per hour, then it must be flying. For the algorithm, speed becomes synonymous with flight. The system ignores the fact that the wheels might still be on the concrete. The moment the speedometer ticks past 100, the plane becomes a ghost to its electronic guardian angel. It vanishes from the safety equation at the exact moment it turns into a heavy, accelerating projectile. This mathematical assumption seems flawless on paper, but it completely ignores the nature of the specific aircraft preparing for takeoff. Not all iron birds sing the same song to the control tower. Deep in the software code lies the devil that turns safety into an illusion. We tend to think of technology as standardized, but in aviation, every manufacturer has its own dialect. Different aircraft report their status to the system in different ways, and this discrepancy becomes fatal. And this is where one of the main characters in our drama takes the stage. The Embraer 190. This compact, nimble airliner is configured by its creators to be extremely aggressive. Impatience is written into its avionics. While heavy Boeings wait for a serious amount of speed before changing their status, the Embraer starts shouting, "I'm airborne," into the system after reaching just 50 knots. Think about that. Just 50 knots. That's barely 60 miles per hour. Your average car on the freeway drives faster, but for this plane's onboard computer, that speed already marks the beginning of flight. For the RIMCAS safety system, this signal is an absolute command. Upon receiving the data for 50 knots, The algorithm obediently nods and follows its instruction. Disable alert. Threat on the ground is gone. In the system's digital brain, the runway is instantly cleared, glowing green. The computer is certain the plane is already in the sky, but the reality outside the window is very different. Physically, the airliner is still pressed firmly to the concrete by all its landing gear. It's heavy, it's only just beginning its real takeoff roll, and it's occupying the very space that's supposed to be clear. The result is a terrifying paradox. The safety system voluntarily puts on a blindfold before the situation even becomes critical. The electronic shield designed to prevent a catastrophe shuts itself off at the precise moment it's needed most, leaving human beings alone with the laws of physics and inertia. Sometimes, a cloudless sky is more treacherous than a gathering storm, because it lulls your survival instinct to sleep. Let's go back to the weather we started with. It's too good. Almost unnaturally perfect for a Canadian winter. It's this crystal-clear air that gives air traffic controllers the green light to kick the airport into turbo mode. A procedure known as visual separation comes into play. The controller in the tower sees an endless queue of aircraft waiting to depart. Time is money, literally. Every minute spent idling on the taxiway burns hundreds of liters of jet fuel. So, when visibility allows, they set the rigid radar instructions aside. Instead of waiting for the first plane to become a dot on the horizon, the controller clears the next one for takeoff almost immediately. At that moment, the responsibility for maintaining a safe distance flies out of the controller's cozy chair and straight into the cockpit. The command is simple. Maintain visual separation. This means the crew now has to keep an eye on the guy in front of them and not tread on their heels. The controller is essentially saying, "You see the obstacle? Great, you deal with it." This approach turns the runway into a high-speed conveyor belt. Intervals shrink, airport capacity skyrockets, airlines save millions of dollars, and passengers get home faster. This entire gigantic mechanism is operating at the peak of its efficiency, like a perfectly oiled machine. It seems like a triumph of logistics and human skill. However, in the race for speed, the system becomes fragile. Efficiency is wonderful, but it only works in sterile conditions, when everyone involved behaves predictably. On this frosty morning, a new variable enters the fast and cheap equation, one that nobody accounted for. Human error, multiplied by a technological blind spot. The risk is already baked into the system, but for now, it's hidden behind the sheen of perfect statistics and bright sunlight. 446 people are in a metal trap, with no idea that the countdown on their fate has already begun. The time is exactly 9:48 in the morning. We're at the threshold of runway 06 left. Poised for takeoff is an Embraer 190 in the recognizable Air Canada livery. Inside this narrow-body jet are 87 passengers. Some are reading the morning paper, others have their eyes closed, bracing for the G-force. Everything is going according to plan, and the crew is preparing for a routine departure to Denver. But look behind it, at the back of this queue. There, like a predator in ambush, a true behemoth awaits its turn, a Boeing 777. This is the flagship of the fleet, the absolute heavyweight of civil aviation. On board are 359 people. The contrast is staggering. If the Embraer is a nimble speedboat, the Boeing behind it is an ocean liner. The massive engines of the 777 suck in air with a greed that seems to make the very space around it tremble. The calm voice of the controller comes through the headsets. Air Canada 606, cleared for takeoff. The words are simple, but they set in motion an irreversible chain of events. The pilots of the small jet confirm the command and smoothly push the thrust levers forward. The engines spool up to takeoff power, and the machine lurches forward, gathering momentum. And at that very moment, right in the middle of its acceleration, reality glitches. The Embraer's speedometer shows 50 knots. For the pilots, this is just the beginning of their journey. But for the Rimcast system, it's a signal to stand down. As soon as this speed threshold is crossed, the electronics go blind. It erases the aircraft from the digital map of the airfield, mistakenly believing it's already in the sky. The trap snaps shut. For the computer, the runway is now pristine and clear, even though in reality, 87 living people are still hurtling down it at immense speed. In the digital world, you can disappear without ever leaving the ground. Right now, the Embraer 190's engines are roaring, greedily devouring the cold concrete. Physically, it's 35 tons of metal, fuel, and people, vibrating over the pavement joints and occupying a very real place in space. But if you were to glance at the controller's monitor, you'd witness a frightening magic trick. As soon as the speed crosses that fateful 50-knot mark, the aircraft's green tag on the screen changes its status. To the silicon brain of the RIMCA system, this plane no longer exists as a ground obstacle. It becomes a digital ghost. The safety algorithm goes into sleep mode for this specific target because, according to its code, the aircraft is already safely in the sky. The computer washes its hands of the situation, leaving it completely unsupervised. The controller casts a quick glance through the tower window. He sees the receding silhouette of the Embraer passing the point where planes usually begin to lift their nose gear. The picture in his head is perfect. Not wanting to waste a second of precious morning traffic, he keys his mic and gives the command to the Leviathan waiting in line. Air Canada 002 Heavy, line up and wait, cleared for takeoff. The crew of the giant Boeing 777 reacts instantly. The pilots release the brakes, and the 300-ton beast begins to move. And in the tower, something happens that closes the circle of probability. The controller, absolutely certain that the runway is clear and protected by electronics, makes a routine move. He swivels in his chair. He needs to deal with another flight on the north side, and he turns his back on runway 06 left, completely losing visual contact with the unfolding scene. The visual illusion of safety is the most terrifying thing that can happen in a cockpit. The crew of the giant Boeing behind sees a completely normal picture ahead. Their colleagues in the small Embraer are racing forward. The plane's nose is already pitching up, and it looks like any second it will be airborne, clearing the way. The Boeing pilots are calm. They push the thrust levers forward, and the turbines begin to build up monstrous power for the takeoff roll. 300 tons of metal start to move. They are certain that by the time they pick up speed, the runway will be empty. But inside the Embraer's cockpit, reality shatters. A sharp, dull thud shakes the fuselage. It's not an explosion, but it's loud enough to make your heart skip a beat. A large bird has slammed into the skin just centimeters below the captain's side window. In aviation, this is called a bird strike. The situation is critical. The pilots can't see the damage, but their minds instantly paint the worst-case scenario. What if the bird was sucked into an engine? What if they lose thrust at the most critical moment of liftoff? The captain's eyes dart to the instruments. The speed is 139 knots. That's 257 kilometers per hour. They're just a hair's breadth away from V1, the point of no return, after which you have to stop. You have to take off, even if your engines are on fire. The captain has a split second. The decision is made at a reflex level, faster than fear can even register. "Aborting takeoff," comes the firm command. The pilot snaps the thrust levers to idle and slams his feet on the brake pedals. The spoilers on the wings deploy to press the machine into the ground. The airliner, which for the controller and the safety system is already flying, suddenly becomes a screaming projectile of screeching rubber, desperately trying to stop in the middle of the runway. Inertia pulls it forward, but the physics of braking are now working against the logic of the controller, who isn't even looking in their direction. Sometimes the loudest cry for help sounds like nothing more than the crackle of static in a headset. In the cockpit of the Embraer, now shuddering from the emergency braking, the first officer follows his training to the letter. His hand instinctively finds the push-to-talk button on his yoke. It's a reflex, honed by years of practice. He keys the mic and transmits the phrase that should stop time itself. "Canada 710, aborting." This message is meant to save their lives. But a cruel twist of fate aligns the timing down to a millisecond. At that exact same instant, in that very same heartbeat, the first officer of the Boeing right behind them also presses his button. He's simply trying to confirm to the controller that he has received takeoff clearance. Canada 002 heavy, rolling, he says in a calm, confident voice. The two radio signals collide in the invisible space of the airwaves and go to war. Pilots call this a stepped-on transmission. Imagine two people trying to walk through a narrow doorway at the same time. They both get stuck. The radio waves overlap, creating an unpleasant, squealing feedback. The more powerful transmitter of the Boeing, or perhaps just a fluke of phasing, mercilessly drowns out the Embraer's message. The airwaves literally swallow the critical warning. In the control tower, all that comes through the speakers is unintelligible noise and fragments of the Boeing's call. The controller, still with his back to the runway dealing with other aircraft, never hears the words, "aborting takeoff." To him, it was just another routine radio exchange. No alarms are raised. Neither the controller nor the crew of the accelerating giant has any idea that up ahead, shrouded in a haze of exhaust fumes, an invisible concrete wall has just appeared. The script for disaster has already been written, and now it's being performed in complete silence, broken only by the roar of turbines. Your eyes are traitors when speed begins to warp the very perception of reality. In the Boeing's cockpit, the pilots are focused, their bodies pressed into their seats by the mounting G-force. The engines are screaming, devouring space, as the 300-ton machine rapidly gains momentum. The crew looks ahead, through the windscreen. They can clearly see the silhouette of the Embraer on the runway ahead. It's there. It hasn't disappeared. But this is where a treacherous psychological trick comes into play, known as the illusion of motion. When you yourself are moving with immense acceleration, your brain tries to stabilize the picture. To the Boeing pilots, it seems as though the plane ahead is also moving fast, that it's pulling away or is already lifting off the ground. Their brains are feeding them the script they expect to see. The runway is clear, the obstacle is moving away. They don't realize that the distance between them is shrinking at a terrifying rate, like someone is fast-forwarding a tape. The human eye simply can't properly judge the distance to an object on a flat, gray expanse of concrete with no clear reference points. Meanwhile, in the control tower, there's a false, deadly calm. The person responsible for all these lives still has his back to the window, busy with another sector. If he were to look at his radar right now, he wouldn't see a thing out of the ordinary. On the digital map, a theater of the absurd is playing out. The Embraer's tag glows green with an airborne status because the system hasn't yet figured out its braking. The Boeing's tag, now accelerating past 100 knots, also gets an airborne status. To the computer, it looks like two airliners flying in the sky, one behind the other, at a safe distance. The machine's logic is flawless, and completely wrong. There isn't a sound in the speakers, no warning sirens, no red flashes on the monitors, no wail from the collision avoidance system. RIMCAS is silent, assuming there's no one on the ground. In this sterile silence, two planes are hurtling toward the same point in space and time, separated only by seconds and a flawed sense of what was real. If you think things couldn't possibly get more absurd, this morning's script is ready to prove you wrong. There comes a moment when a chain of events turns into a surreal, almost comical tragedy. The controller, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding on the runway, decides he can speed things up a bit. He didn't hear the takeoff abort. He didn't see the braking. In his mental map of the airport, the runway is clear and ready for new guests, so he keys his mic and invites a third player onto the stage, a Dash 8 turboprop from Jazz Aviation. The command sounds routine. Jazz, line up and wait. The pilots of the third aircraft obediently begin to taxi onto the very same strip of asphalt where a race against death is already underway. The situation on runway 06 left is now geometrically impossible. There are now 3 airliners here at the same time. One is braking in a panic, trying to shed its momentum. The second is hurtling toward its tail, building up takeoff power. And the third, completely oblivious, is slowly crawling towards them, like a random pedestrian wandering onto a racetrack. The most chilling part of this scene is the reaction of the electronics. The RIMCAS system remains deathly silent. To the system, it all makes sense. 2 planes are flying, even though they're on the ground, and the third is moving too slowly to be considered a threat. All the algorithmic conditions for silence have been met perfectly. The technology is working flawlessly, executing its code to the letter. And it's this very perfection that's leading everyone to the edge of a cliff. But physics is relentless. The gap between the nose of the accelerating Boeing and the tail of the braking Embraer is melting away with frightening speed. Just a few seconds ago, it was a safe couple of kilometers. Now, it's down to hundreds of meters. 1,600, 1,400, 1,000. A massive shadow is catching up to its target, and there's almost no room left to maneuver. 235 kilometers per hour. That's a speed where the laws of physics stop being your friend and become a harsh judge. We're in the cockpit of the Boeing now. The roar is unimaginable, the vibration from the landing gear shaking the control yokes. The airspeed indicator needle is quivering at 127 knots. That's just a few seconds shy of rotation speed. The inertia of this massive, accelerating airliner is so immense that stopping it now is like trying to halt a falling train with your bare hands. At that moment, something inside the Boeing captain's head just clicks. The picture in the windshield suddenly stops matching his mental map. His brain, which had been tricked by the expectation of a takeoff, suddenly grasps the horrifying truth. That dot up ahead, the Embraer, it isn't shrinking, flying off into the sky. It's growing. It's rapidly expanding, transforming from a harmless silhouette into a wall of aluminum. And that wall isn't flying. It's glued to the ground. Survival instinct kicks in faster than the pilot can recall any paragraph from the manual. And the manual is merciless here. At such a high speed, you're only allowed to abort a takeoff for a catastrophic engine failure or a fire. In all other cases, the risk of overrunning the runway and burning out the brakes is considered too high. Pilots are usually taught, when in doubt, take off. But right now, the captain knows that if he continues, he will simply slice through the tail of the plane in front of him. Logic gives way to a primal reaction. The captain exhales a single word that cancels everything. Reject. His hand slams the thrust levers back to idle and immediately engages the reverse thrusters. His feet mash the brake pedals to the floor with monstrous force. The smooth acceleration is instantly replaced by the brutal G-force of braking, which sends passengers hanging in their seatbelts and turns unsecured items into projectiles. 300 tons of living metal are now locked in a vicious battle with the laws of inertia. The second the brakes clamp down on the discs, the giant airframe shudders through its entire being, as if it's hit an invisible reef. Inside the cabin, it feels like a violent impact. Seatbelts instantly snap taut, digging into passengers' bodies and knocking the wind out of them. People are thrown forward. Unsecured bags and tablets are ripped from their spots and go flying down the aisle. This isn't a gentle slowdown at the terminal. This is a raw, aggressive attempt to stop a runaway train. Outside, at the landing gear, a technological hellscape is unfolding. The carbon brake packs, squeezed to their limits by hydraulics, heat up instantly. The gray metal turns cherry red in a split second, then a blinding orange, glowing in the frosty air like molten lava. The temperature at the friction point skyrockets to 1,000 degrees. The tires scream, smearing rubber across the concrete and leaving thick, black scars behind. The Boeing greedily devours the asphalt, burning off the colossal kinetic energy that, a moment ago, was supposed to lift it into the stratosphere. From the cockpit, this process looks like a scene from a nightmare. The tail of the Embraer ahead isn't just looming. It's growing at an alarming rate, filling the entire windshield. It feels like a collision is already a foregone conclusion, that the nose is about to slam into the metal skin. But the draconian measures are working. The speed is dropping. The monster is starting to yield. The distance is still shrinking, but there's a gap. A safe space remains between the Boeing's nose cone and the smaller plane's tail. The catastrophe, which seemed inevitable just a second ago, reluctantly retreats, defeated by the brakes. The airliner comes to a stop. The roar of the engines fades to an idle hum. A heavy, ringing silence hangs in the cockpit, broken only by the frantic pounding of the crew's hearts. They just peered over the edge and, by some miracle, managed to hang on. The voice in the headphones sounds disturbingly routine, shattering the cozy atmosphere of the control tower. The silence is broken by a short message from the Boeing pilot. Tower 002, rejecting takeoff. Those words are like a bucket of ice water. The controller, who until this second was certain his plan was flawless, finally reacts. He hears an abnormal situation, but his brain is still clinging to the old picture of the world. He thinks the Embraer is long gone, and the problem is only with the giant behind it. The controller shoves off the floor and spins his chair 180 degrees. His eyes, out of pure reflex, scan upwards, towards the clouds. He's looking for the receding silhouette of the first plane where it should be, climbing, turning into a dot. But the sky is clear, piercingly empty. No engine trails, no glint of a fuselage in the sun. The controller's gaze drops in a panic, down to the gray ribbon of concrete. And that's when reality hits him like a punch to the gut. He sees not one, but two planes, frozen on runway 06 left. The small Embraer, with the massive bulk of the Boeing looming over it. They are so close that from the height of the tower, it looks like they're touching. In that moment, time stops for the man in the tower. The shock is so intense it steals his breath for a second. The entire traffic flow he'd been managing in his head crumbles to dust. And at that exact instant, as if to mock the human drama, the technology finally wakes up. Now that both planes have slowed to a near stop, the sensors finally understand they are on the ground. The RIMCAS system jolts out of its slumber. A piercing, hysterical wail of a siren echoes through the tower, and red warning circles flash across the screens. The electronic guardian only starts screaming about a collision threat after the worst is already over. It sounds like a late apology from the very technology that failed the people who had just saved themselves. The siren tearing through the tower now sounds like a cruel, belated mockery of common sense. Look at the controller's monitors. They finally light up like a Christmas tree with red alert codes. The RIMCAS system, that vaunted electronic brain, has suddenly seen the light. The algorithm discovers, to its horror, that 3 airliners are clustered together on one narrow patch of asphalt. It sees the conflict between the stationary Embraer, the giant Boeing hovering over it, and the small Dash 8 still crawling toward them. The computer goes into a digital meltdown, flagging the situation as an imminent disaster. But this reaction feels like a complete and utter mockery. The most advanced, expensive, and complex safety system in the airport starts sounding the alarm at the precise moment its help is no longer needed. The electronics are like a careless cop, bursting into the room with a gun drawn only after the shootout is over and the smoke has cleared. It's shouting about a danger that has already passed. The bottom line is a chilling but honest fact. The lives of nearly 500 people that morning weren't saved by smart microchips, or radar, or even strict air traffic control protocols. They were saved by the animal reflexes of a captain who slammed on the brakes against all instructions, and by the discipline of the Embraer crew, who screamed out a warning over the airwaves just in time. The humans in the cockpits completely outplayed the flawed computer and its blind spot. In this case, technology wasn't the guardian angel. It was just a bystander, a spectator that simply recorded the fact. Yes, there was a lethal threat here. However, once the first wave of adrenaline subsides, you're left with the cold, hard math. Why, despite the monstrous inertia and all the errors, did no one die today? The answer lies in those few meters of asphalt that remained between the nose cone of one airliner and the tail of the other. Sometimes, trying to fix one error in aviation leads to a new, even more insidious trap. After an incident like this, engineers and safety experts sit down to rewrite the rules of the game. The solution seems obvious. Just get into the brain of the RIMCAS system and change a couple of lines of code. The logic is simple. Just raise the activation threshold. Let the computer assume a plane has taken off not at 50 knots, but at, say, 100. That way, the tag on the radar screen will stay on the ground for longer, and the system won't shut off prematurely. But when the specialists run simulations with these new parameters, they run into the boy who cried wolf effect. If you force the system to be too vigilant and keep planes on its radar for longer, the number of alerts in the tower skyrockets. Rimcast starts to panic at the drop of a hat, treating routine takeoffs as potential collisions. This creates a psychological dead end. Imagine a car alarm in your neighborhood that goes off every single night just from a gust of wind. The first time, you look out the window. By the 10th time, you just shut the window and put in earplugs. The same thing happens with air traffic controllers. If a siren is constantly wailing for no real reason, alarm fatigue sets in. And on the one day the danger is real, the person at the console will just instinctively hit the cancel button, assuming it's just another glitch. The engineers find themselves in a state of zugzwang. Making the system too sensitive means deafening the controllers with false alarms. Leaving it as is means risking lives again, just like this morning. A technical solution that satisfies everyone simply doesn't exist. So, in the end, instead of a cutting-edge software update, the industry comes up with a bureaucratic crutch. A special bulletin is issued, just a regular piece of paper with some text on it. Its essence boils down to a simple warning. Guys, be aware, the Embraers lie. Controllers are simply told they need to remember this specific quirk of this particular aircraft type and not to rely on the automation. The most sophisticated safety system in the world ultimately comes down to human memory and attention. Aviation regulations are often written not in ink in some office, but in cold sweat on the tarmac. This morning's chaos on runway 06 left becomes a harsh but necessary lesson for the entire industry. Canadian regulators, studying the seconds that separated the flights from a collision, begin to rethink their entire approach. The procedure of visual separation, that very loophole allowing controllers to pack the schedule tighter by relying on the pilot's eyes, is now put under a microscope. It becomes obvious. When technology has blind spots, shifting the responsibility onto the flight crews is playing with fire. History shows us, mercilessly, that the concept of moderate traffic is a dangerous illusion. It's the half-empty shift and the quiet on the radio that dulls vigilance more than a storm warning. When the workload is maxed out, adrenaline keeps a controller sharp. But when everything seems calm and one person is doing the work of two, attention starts to wander. The empty chairs in the tower, a result of saving on staff salaries, nearly cost far too much. The incident at Pearson vividly demonstrates a simple but terrifying truth. Saving time at the expense of safety is a loan that aviation takes out from chance itself. Airlines gain minutes, airports increase their capacity, but it's a debt that will one day have to be repaid. And the interest on that loan can be catastrophic. We see 300 tons of metal freezing just meters from tragedy, reminding everyone that assembly line efficiency should never come before human life. But the main lesson of this day isn't found in updated manuals or tweaked radar settings. It's much deeper. It's about the fact that in an age of total automation, smart algorithms, and digital systems, the last and most reliable line of defense isn't a computer, but a living, breathing person. It's the pilot's instinct, his ability to question what he sees and hit the brakes against the rules. That proves more reliable than any microchip. We've grown accustomed to blindly trusting what our glowing screens show us. In the modern world, a radar display, a navigation screen, or a system sensor has become our ultimate source of truth. We've convinced ourselves that the machine doesn't make mistakes, doesn't get tired, and sees what is invisible to the human eye. But the story of that frosty morning in Toronto brutally, and at the same time beautifully, shatters that myth. 446 unique lives continue on their journey today, not because of a perfect piece of software, and not because of strict air traffic protocols. Their hearts are still beating only because, in a critical fraction of a second, the man at the controls refused to be a mere extension of the computer. The Boeing captain cast aside the ironclad logic of the manual, which demanded he take off at that speed. He trusted not the green light on his instrument panel, but his own primal sense of danger. Of course, technology makes the skies safer. Automation handles the routine, radar pierces the clouds, and warning systems save thousands of flights every day. But this incident reminds us of the most important thing. Technology is only powerful in the predictable world of algorithms. The moment a situation goes off script, the full power of electronics becomes a useless pile of metal. The final line of defense is always the living, thinking, doubting pilot. It's the human being capable of sensing that something is wrong, despite what the instruments are saying. The digital world tries to convince us it has everything under control, but reality remains analog. And sometimes, to save hundreds of souls from certain death, the most advanced technology must yield to a simple human glance out the window.